Hello and welcome to Motormouth Monday. Today is the 1st of May, and we had a lot of racing this past weekend. Joined by Zach Buchanan and Mark Sabetka. Say hi, guys.
Hey, what's up?
Hey, what's up?
This weekend started off with some NASCAR racing from the NASCAR Xfinity Series. Tell us more about that, Zach.
So the Xfinity Series was at Richmond on Saturday afternoon with Daniel Hemrick starting on pole. Austin Dillon would take home the Stage 1 victory. And your Dash for Cash qualifiers, Justin Allgaier, Daniel Hemrick, Kyle Benjamin in his first start, and Elliott Sadler. Justin Allgaier would continue his run of success while taking home the Stage 2 victory. And then late in the race, Kyle Larson would hold off Justin Allgaier in overtime to take home the win. The race actually ended under caution with a crash involving Ryan Reed on the back straightaway after they crossed the overtime line. So it was Larson, Allgaier, Hemrick, Austin Dillon, and Ryan Blaney, the top five. And some honorable mention, Casey Mears finished 9th and Spencer Gallagher finished 10th, with Justin Allgaier bringing home the Dash for Cash. Sunday, the Monster Energy NASCAR Cup Series was at Richmond as well for the Toyota Owners 400. Matt Kenseth was on pole with Ryan Blaney to his outside. Bit of a surprise in qualifying. Kyle Larson, Jimmy Johnson, Brad Keselowski all started outside the top 15. Matt Kenseth would take home the Stage 1 victory with Brad Keselowski taking home the Stage 2 victory. The race was pretty calm until it picked up with about 50 to go when Jimmy Johnson would get into Dale Earnhardt Jr., blowing Jr.'s tire later on, and it crashed with 43 to go. 36 laps left in the race was when Matt Kenseth blew a tire. Caution a couple laps later would come out for debris. 23 to go. Ryan Blaney got a tap from Kurt Busch that set his tire down, and he would end up crashing. After a plethora of strategy and restarts, Joey Logano would hold off a charge from Brad Keselowski to win the Toyota Owners 400. It's his 18th victory and his 300th start, with Penske taking the top two spots, Keselowski in second. Denny Hamlin would come home third. Ricky Stenhouse, surprise there, finished fourth on strategy, and Kevin Harvick slipped into the top five. All right, and this weekend, ARCA was in action. Mark, what you got for us?
Well, ARCA was in action this weekend at the Salem Speedway. There was a threat of rain every day this week, and they were only able to get one practice session in. Travis Miller would be on the pole based on practice speeds because qualifying was rained out as well as all the rest of the practice sessions. The race was very interesting as Christian Eckes would lose the lead from Dalton Sargent around the halfway point, and Sargent just ran away with the thing by lapping the field and winning the race by a whole lap, almost 2 laps, over Gus Dean, who finished second, Kyle Weatherman in third, Shane Lee in fourth, and Austin Terrio in fifth. Austin Terrio, Kyle Weatherman, Dalton Sargent would retain the top 3 positions in points in a very thin margin. Now we'll send it off to Brad for Pirelli World Challenge.
The Pirelli World Challenge went to VIR this weekend for a megaton of races. Looks like about 6 races this weekend through the different classes: Sprint X, Touring Car A and B, and GTS. The first race of the weekend was the Touring Car race that happened on Saturday, with Paul Holton winning after a restart due to a red flag situation caused by Jason Fichter flipping his Honda Accord on the last turn. Walked away unscathed, luckily. That same day, Nico Yaman won the GTS race in an ANSA Motorsports prepared KTM Expo GT4 with some blazing pace, setting the fastest lap of the race. In GTS AM, in the same race, Aristotle Ballo won the AM category in his Aston Martin Vantage GT4. Sprint X, which is one of the most exciting, pretty much the top tier of Pirelli World Challenge race, happened also on Saturday. The team of Mancini and Montermini won that class, driving a Ferrari 488 GT3, and won by about 0.2 of a second over the second place McCann Racing of Mike Skeen and Alex Davis. GTS that same day, the second race, was won by Nico Jamin again in the ANSA Motorsports KTM Expo GT4 by an entire lap over Jeff Courtney in the Maserati GT4. And the final Sprint X race of the weekend was a nail-biter due to odd pit road speeding penalties given out, but luckily Pirelli World Challenge officials rectified the issue, and Ryan Dial won that race in the Mercedes-AMG GT3, which is the actual first win for the Mercedes-AMG GT3 in all professional auto racing. So notables for that race is the team of Cooper and Jordan Taylor in the Cadillac ATS R finished third, and Spencer Pumpelly driving the Magnus Racing RS8 LMS finished fifth. In F1, F1 went to Sochi for the Russian Grand Prix this weekend, and Sebastian Vettel was on pole. Before the grid even started, Fernando Alonso was going out for his reconnaissance laps, and the car broke, and he didn't even get to start the race because of that failure. On lap 1, Valtteri Bottas took the lead from Sebastian Vettel and went to a commanding lead. Lance Stroll on lap 1 as well self-spun his Williams, while Roman Grosjean went too hot going into turn 5 and took out Jolene Palmer. And not the only DNFs in that race. It looks like Daniel Ricciardo had a brake failure and had to retire that car. Pascal Wehrlein also with a mechanical failure, and Marcus Ericsson with another mechanical failure was out of that race. It was a nail-biter towards the end with strategy taking place, but Valtteri Bottas just had the amazing pace and won that race with Sebastian Vettel finishing second, Kimi Räikkönen third, Lewis Hamilton fourth, and Max Verstappen fifth. Notable, Carlos Sainz scored the last point, finishing 10th, and Felipe Massa 9th. So now I take it over to Mark with World of Outlaws and USAC.
The World of Outlaws were at Plymouth Speedway this weekend for one of the most thrilling races of the World of Outlaws this season. Parker Price Miller was on the pole, and David Gravel ended up winning the race, passing Jason Sides, who led a majority of the race, coming to the white flag in turns 3 and 4. David Gravel was third, coming to 2 to go, as it looked like it was coming down to Jason Sides and Aaron Rutzel, who were putting on a pretty good show. Gravel came out of nowhere to end up winning the show, and Sides would finish second, Aaron Rutzel third, Donnie Schatz got fourth, retaining the points lead, and Brad Sweet would round out the top 5. USAC was in Phoenix this weekend for the Copper World Classic for the first time since 2009. Bobby Santos was on the pole for the 100-lap A main feature. He would lead from lap 1 to lap 21 as he would be taken over by David Byrne, who would take over the race lead for about 8 laps, and then Santos would reclaim the lead. Then Byrne would take back the lead from lap 33 to lap 92, as Santos would then overcome him for the lead to lead the last 8 laps of the race to lap 100. And then Bobby Santos would become the first non-Swanson last name driver to win a pavement Silver Crown race. 2015. Bobby Santos would win the race, followed by Cody Swanson, David Byrne, Davey Hamilton, and Jerry Coons Jr. rounding out the top 5. Cody Swanson would stay in the points lead after the race last week. Now we go to Zach for IndyCar at Phoenix.
The Verizon IndyCar Series was in action on a solo ride this weekend. None of the Mazda Road to Indy was in action along with them. So Verizon IndyCar Series at Phoenix for the Indy Grand Prix of Phoenix. Elio Castroneves was on pole with a track record of 194.9 miles per hour average speed, which is blazing fast. Blistered the track record from last year. Turn 2 of lap 1 got pretty hectic. He turned into a junkyard as 5 Hondas crashed, triggered by Michael Oloshin's spin. Michael Oloshin, Graham Rahal, Marco Andretti, Sebastian Bourdais, and Max Chilton were all involved. This first caution, amazingly enough, lasted 20 laps. Castroneves would hold the lead until the first round of pit stops, where Will Power would use a little bit of strategy to get the lead. And just past halfway, in the middle of the pit stop cycle, Takuma Sato would crash coming off turn 4, while Simon Pagenaud was in the lead. And due to everybody else pitting while he stayed out, he had a whole lap on the field, which allowed him to come down pit road and get his service, and the field to take the wave around, leaving 5 cars on the lead lap. Later on in the race, Joseph Newgarden would have a problem with contact. He'd have to pit to replace his wing, leaving 4 cars on the lead lap. Simon Pagenaud would bring home his first oval victory with Will Power and J.R. Hildebrand rounding out the podium. That was Hildebrand's first podium for Ed Carpenter Racing. And then Elio Castroneves came home 4th with Scott Dixon, rounding out the top 5. And let's send it over to Brad. What you got for some global rallycross?
Well, Memphis, Tennessee was on fire this weekend with Global Rallycross, getting back to the old Memphis Oval over there. And Scott Speed and Tanner Faust swept pretty much both races in the weekend in the supercar class. Volkswagen was amazing that weekend. Steve Arpin ended up rounding out the podium. Mitchell DeYoung, actually in his first season in Global Rallycross, was 4th. And Oliver Eriksson, Sebastian Eriksson, the brothers, were 5th and 7th. Patrick Sandell was an unfortunate 9th after doing really well in the heats. And that's really it for Global Rallycross. Okay, so big news coming out of NASCAR once again this week with Dale Earnhardt Jr. announcing his retirement from the Cup Series. And that kind of struck some fans as a surprise, but I mean, to some of us, we kind of figured. I mean, he is getting old, the concussion recovery, and a lot of other outside factors. He was not doing really well at the start of the season. It looks like I remember reading in an article that he announced to Rick Hendrick, I think a few weeks prior, that he was going to make that announcement. What are you guys' takes on that?
I mean, I don't think you could have thought of a better time. I know this really doesn't matter as much, but it kind of makes sense because it is Junior's contract year at Hendrick. I know they wouldn't boot him out being his contract year. He even said he wanted to fulfill his commitment with his sponsors, and it makes sense. I mean, it's a contract year in that regard. I mean, he wants to have a family, and you know, the complications of racing are starting to catch up with him. I wouldn't say physically, but he's just being cautious because he wants to have a family, and I can't blame him for that one bit. And the performance on track, it makes sense. I mean, he hasn't been performing bad, but it's just the bad luck, and I couldn't think of a better time for this to happen.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing for him, as he hasn't really been up to his performance this year as he usually is. Like, generally, he runs closer to the top 10 and is more of a contender for wins. But I mean, granted, he is coming off of injury, and give it some time, I think he will start to perform this year. But I feel like he just really doesn't really want to be out there as much as he had been. Like, obviously he's a racer and he wants to be out there, but I remember him saying in a press conference, he found out that his career might have been over a lot sooner than he thought it was, and he's just gonna get leapfrogged by this next generation of drivers, and he doesn't want to go out being mediocre. He wants to go out being as close to the top of his game as possible, and I think it's a good decision right now for him to make that choice to retire.
I completely agree with that. Junior has a lot of priorities now in his life, it seems. I mean, and we're just talking about things that we know as the general public. Him being married and him wanting to have children, him running a race team, which is pretty difficult. And I know probably Tony Stewart seeing a whole other side of that right now, and he's talked to a lot of those guys because they were very close friends of him. So I could see why this would be a great move for Junior, and I honestly wish him the best. I just hope that in the future he lives the rest of his life amazingly, because I've been a great fan of his since the DEI days and whatnot, and after all the stuff that he's been through, being in the public light, the death of his father, him catching on fire, and it's a lot. And to be able to have such a positive outlook on it is great. And I wish the best to Junior and his family.
Let's not forget this. This is not going to be the last year we see Dale Jr. in a car. He still has 2 races on his Xfinity schedule for next year. I'm pretty sure that's sponsorship obligations there. But regardless, I mean, it's not going to be the last time we see him in a car. It'd be really cool to see him in a truck
Oh yeah.
because I'm pretty sure that's been something on his bucket list. I mean, how cool would it to see a bunch of retired Cup drivers, run the Eldora truck race? I mean,
Oh.
that'd be something really cool right there. And I know Tony Stewart's tossed around the idea of getting back in a truck. So I mean, it'd definitely be something cool to see.
Yeah, I know Junior's expressed multiple times he wants to get into a truck, and it would definitely be cool to see a lot of guys, current Cup and retired Cup drivers, run Eldora. Unfortunately, we might not see Tony Stewart in a truck unless we get rid of at least at Eldora, if we get rid of the rule to where owners of the track are not allowed to partake in events at the track in a NASCAR sanctioned event. But granted, it would still be cool to see Dale Jr. running a truck, either a partial schedule or just even a few one-offs here and there, because I know he has expressed interest in kind of going backwards down, like the way that you build your way up as a grassroots racer, like go down and run an Xfinity part-time or full-time, run trucks, run some late model races. I could definitely see him running Myrtle Beach Speedway pretty regularly in a late model for at least the next few years, because he's always talked about how that was his proving grounds. That's where he proved himself as a young driver, and that's where he was able to get his first steps in a full-size race car. So I would like to see him run there.
Well, that's a good point, Mark, because he has a late model team, and we've seen him bring up guys like Josh Berry and William Byron drove for him in late models. So it would make sense. He'd be able to kind of take care of those guys, run with them, kind of mentor them. And even not being in the car, that's more time for him to spend with his teams, mentoring drivers. And we also got to remember, this format, this chase format is perfect for Junior. I mean, he hasn't had the consistency. All he has to do is win a race. I mean, Kyle Busch missed, a third of the season in 2015 and went on fire the second half of the season and won the title. So, I mean, anything's possible. How many times has the person that dominated most of the regular season ended up winning the chase? I mean, there's been so many different drivers that have come in and stolen the chase, which is now called the playoffs.
Well, piggybacking off of the whole mentoring thing, it looks like as far as who's going to take that seat in the 88 car, my honest guess is going to be Alex Bowman. There hasn't been any real indication by either Rick Hendrick or Dale Jr. on who's going to take that spot, but who do you guys think might be able to take that spot in that 88?
I feel like if it's not Alex Bowman, they're doing a huge injustice to the NASCAR Monster Energy Series and Hendrick Motorsports, because he's proved all last year when he was filling in for Dale Jr. that he's capable of running competitively in a Cup car at a Hendrick Motorsports fielded car. He can contend for wins given more seat time, as he nearly won Phoenix had it not been for some complications getting into turn one on both his part, Matt Kenseth's part, and just some spotting, just all around, just racing deal. I think he would have come out victorious at Phoenix. I mean, he already had a Cup pole. He nearly won the Sprint Unlimited this year. He's definitely a really good racer, and if he's not in the 88 car, I really don't know what the decision was behind that, because he should be in the 88 car.
I mean, I don't think it should be anybody but Bowman. I mean, Junior, I think it kind of says the uncertainty of who's going to end up in that car, because Junior even said himself he'd like to have some input if the team would allow it on who becomes the driver of that car. Either they're not letting on who is going to be that driver, or they just don't know yet. I mean, it wouldn't make sense. I feel like the top 2 candidates for that ride would be Bowman and Byron. There's been a lot of talk of Byron getting that car, but at the same time, it's Byron's first year in Xfinity. I don't think he can just move him up, even if Byron were to win the title. I think Bowman's been a much better representative for that car. I think it'd be better to have him in that car. I mean, Mark, you even said it. He ran great at Phoenix, and he had limited time in that car. I mean, he ran, I think, 10 or 12 races in that car, if not less. And before hopping in the 88, when was the last time he was actually in a competitive car? I mean, he ran for Tommy Baldwin. He ran for BK Racing. He ran for
even in Xfinity. Though,
yeah.
I mean, honestly,
we'd have to go back. Besides his one-off races for Junior Motorsports, we'd have to go back to when he was in ARCA driving for Cunningham Motorsports and nearly won the title.
Yeah,
I think that was the last really competitive car.
That was the last time he was in cars capable of winning races weekly.
And that was what, 2012?
2012, 2011, yeah, about that time.
Yeah, in 2013 he drove for Rab Racing in the Xfinity Series, so it's not like
it was not top tier equipment, but
right.
I mean he drove the wheels off that car.
Weekly wins, but he definitely. I think if he would have had another year in that car, they could have easily contended for maybe like a win or two here and there off of like a strategy call or like maybe a rain road course, but it wasn't nothing to compare to a Joe Gibbs car or a Hendrick Motorsports car.
Right, and I mean I've even heard, well, if you watched the broadcast of the Cup race on Sunday, DW thought that the best candidate to get the 88 car would be Eric Jones, which I completely disagree with that.
Over Toyota's dead body.
I think that's an interesting argument that he brings up there, like who he thinks should be in the car, because yes, I mean, Eric Jones is, I don't know what the details on his contract are, but he seems to be pretty in there with the Joe Gibbs camp. But with that being said, it wouldn't be the first time that we've seen someone completely 180 their career direction. Like Kyle Busch last year talking about Byron and saying how he would be more successful had he stayed under his wing rather than going to Rick Hendrick. But then again, that brings us back to the topic of Byron. And I personally think, this is just me throwing this out here, that Byron is going to wait around for a few years in Xfinity until either Casey Kane decides to part on his own terms or Jimmy Johnson decides to retire, because as good as he's running, he doesn't have as much time left age-wise, so to speak.
Yeah, you're right. And I don't – see, the thing with Byron moving over to the Chevy camp was – I mean, there's not any room at Toyota. It made sense. I mean, I didn't even think, if not for Carl Edwards stepping aside, I mean, I didn't even think there was any room for Daniel Suarez. And there was so little of competitive rides at the Toyota camp. I mean, there's no way. And Eric Jones, I mean, is in the catbird seat to get the 20 car, in my opinion. So I don't know. It'd be pretty interesting for Jones to throw all that away to move over to the 88 camp. But regardless, he'd end up in a competitive car.
Yeah, but with that said about Daniel Suarez, yeah, that's funny because at the beginning of the year, before Carl Edwards had announced his immediate stepping away from the sport, I was actually throwing out like ideas, just kind of brainstorming amongst myself, being like, what if Suarez was to like stay at Joe Gibbs in Xfinity this year and then just be like, you know what, I'm gonna try another team and like end up trying to get a contract with like a Ford or a Chevy team even, and like just go his own route. Because like we don't really see as much as that now. We see a lot more of team owners going down into an ARCA or a K&N division and bringing drivers all the way up to the Cup Series, or at least to the Xfinity Series, until they bottom out and they just get on this long waiting list and waiting around for a Cup ride. And then they have to grab the next available ride that they can if they want to go Cup racing. That's why we see a lot of this.
Yeah, Bubba Wallace is a really good example
Tommy
of that.
Baldwin Racing, BK Racing, and then it's a shame that that's how it ends up. You just end up bottoming out once you get to a certain level in the sport.
Well, generally you see guys from Xfinity, even if they don't have a direct route to a Cup Series team, say like JRM to Hendrick or, Joe Gibbs or something like that, you see guys pretty much just rush right up the cup, and they end up in a non-competitive car because they don't wait it out, or their sponsors can't wait or something, and you got the dollar signs dangling in front of you. It's it's kind of hard to not, but at the same time, you end up getting rushed up there, and you got to think of all the drivers in the last 15, 20 years that were rushed too early and then kind of got filtered out of the sport.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's why you got to give respect to some of the drivers like Dalton Sargent, for an example, who won the ARCA race today. He's been on the scene since the end of 2014 with his impressive Snowball Derby run, and I don't know what his funding looks like, but I feel like he'd have at least enough financial backing based off of some of the teams that he's run for to be able to get him up to at least an Xfinity ride. But he seems to be able to, like, let's take a step back, let's run some super late model races, let's get some more seat time before I start messing around with some of the big dogs here. And he's going to run some more truck races later this year, as Cunningham Motorsports announced that earlier in the season. But I definitely respect guys like that want to get as much seat time as they can before they start getting up on the big stages, because that's how you know when, like, you know that you're ready to be able to compete against the best.
Something I kind of want to move into after talking about NASCAR, moving into IndyCar, which is kind of ironic. Richmond was at a 3/4 mile track. IndyCar was at a mile track. Since the IndyCar series has moved back to Phoenix with the reconfigured Phoenix track, we haven't seen a live pass for the lead. Like that, I mean, that
Crazy.
racing, like actual racing. I mean, that doesn't count pit stops, that doesn't count mechanical problems, live actual passing for the lead. We have not seen that since they've gone back, because you look at it, Castroneves set the track record last year, led about the first 25 laps, had a tire go down, which that was set up. They even looked into it. Firestone said, yeah, that was a setup thing. Castroneves had a tire go down. Montoya gets the lead out of it. He has a tire go down. And then Dixon gets the lead and never looked back, never was contested for the lead. And he ended up winning the race. And then this year, Castroneves sets the track record again. Never got passed for the lead. Through the first cycle of stops, Will Power gets the lead just purely out of strategy. They never actually passed each other on the track. And then Simon Pagenaud, through another cycle of pit stops, gets the lead. And he was the only car on the lead lap until everybody got the wave around. And he had lapped cars between himself and the other lead lap cars, and he checked out and never looked back. So, I mean, that pretty much says, and the drivers even said this as well. I mean, there's so much drag. There was not much speed fall off from the straightaways to the corners, which really killed the amount of racing we saw. I really feel like they should have taken a lower downforce package there, or pushed a pass or something, because it was really not a good show for the fans.
Those cars put out such a big wake of air, and going into those corners with all that air on there, there's just no way you can get any type of air to the front end of the car behind. And it's just kind of odd. Thinking about it, they've been to Phoenix for the last 2 or 3 years, I think, since the reconfiguration. And that's just such an interesting fact that there's not actually been a live pass for the lead. And it's kind of off-putting, because then you have those glory days from around 2004 to 2007 in the IndyCar series, where going to ovals in general was just one of the most fun, spectacular races you could watch. But
it used to be all ovals before 2005 or 4, something like that.
Yeah, before they merged back, because the whole kart thing. But it's just crazy. I hope that IndyCar as a general being kind of just comes together to try to see how we can figure out how we can put those fans in those seats.
They need to bring back some of the glory days tracks, like Milwaukee and some of the other ovals. They need to bring back a few more of them, I feel like, to at least get the interest of fans in those regions, because I mean, street courses are nice, but you can't just keep being like, oh, let's go to this town and make this random street course that's never existed before. Like, it was cool when they went back to Houston for a little bit, because that's a street course that existed at one time, and it was always a good race, and they had some really good races there. And
Remember Baltimore was a mess.
Baltimore, that's a prime example of street courses that just didn't really need to happen.
Yeah, well, and the thing is, I'm a fan of oval racing too, but when you can't promote those races, it's really hard to make them happen. And I mean, Phoenix barely got any people. Guarantee you, Gateway, even though it's the return race, they probably won't get that many people. Texas, which had a great race last year, on a rainout, they didn't get many people either. I mean, really, the only oval crowd getter is Indianapolis. And, I mean, for a couple years there, their crowd kind of tapered off. Regardless, still a great show. Thing is, when they merged back together, you know, IRL and kart, there were a lot of diehard oval fans. But the thing is, none of those fans went to those races.
Yeah.
I mean, there were so many people that were advocates of oval racing, but nobody went to the races. And there's, you know, a pretty decent crowd for road and street racing, you know, that they actually enjoy that, and they actually go to the races. They get pretty good turnouts. And that all kind of goes back to, you know, the 90s when they had all those big sponsors and everything, and the interest just kind of died off, you know, and there's races where sponsors would buy tickets for employees, and, you know, a pretty decent amount of the people that were there was a result of companies buying tickets, which that doesn't happen much anymore because there's not as much interest in it. Probably one of the only examples of that is Mid-Ohio, where Honda buys pretty much 80% of the tickets, gives them out to all the Honda factories in Ohio, and that's pretty much how you get your attendance for Mid-Ohio.
Yeah. Auto Club and Texas are two big examples of races that were probably like 2015 and last year's Texas race were two of the least attended best races, in my opinion.
Oh, yeah.
Those two races were both very just intense, edge of your seat type deal races. Like Auto Club, I don't think there was a lap where I wasn't just like, this is insane.
Oh, yeah.
This isn't insane, I guess it would be, but
reminds me a lot of the Chicagoland races in the mid to late 2000s.
yeah.
I wish they went back, yeah.
Chicagoland and Kentucky, those were two tracks that always produced some really intense racing, and I think there needs to be some way to where we can, at least IndyCar can, promote like the oval racing being just like that badass racing where it's just on the edge all the time type deal.
And that's it for the show today. Tune in 2 weeks where we will have up-and-coming NASCAR star and road racer extraordinaire Will Rogers on the show. Thank you guys for tuning in. And from Zach, Mark, and I, this was Motormouth Monday.